Lauren,
Hey.
you are the initial guest in
Wow, I'm
this
honored.
new video setup. I mean, it's the same room that I've always been in since we moved here, but this is the first time I got this new desk.
It's beautiful.
And now we can do a two-person conversation, which is pretty exciting.
It's great.
It's not quite Pints with Aquinas level on the set quality, but here we are.
Here we are.
So
It's
welcome.
great.
You're the first guest. How are you?
I'm well. Yeah.
So
I'm much better with this tea too.
good.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I mean, I feel like this is the living in northern Indiana.
Yes.
You always get like the last gasps of winter.
It's true.
And it's a long, fading death rattle,
That's
like
right.
we had some nice days in March, early March, some nice days in late March. And then in between we had a fair amount of just cold days.
That's right. Yeah.
But getting better. I've seen buds coming out on the trees, which is always a sign of good things to
Beautiful.
come,
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're leaving us.
I know.
You've been in South Bend for
Right. 2 months.
2 months. and you're
Yeah.
leaving us.
Just for the best months, February and
yeah,
March.
really timed that well.
Only got frostbite once. Biking to the train station.
You actually?
I did. Frost
Wow.
nip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's okay.
How'd that happen?
Well, I was biking to the South Shore train station
Yes.
to catch an early train on a Monday to go renew my passport in Chicago.
That's a fairly long bike ride from where
It
you
was, yeah, it was a fairly long bike ride. I didn't want to
hence the
bug.
frost nip.
Yes. And then I managed to pull up within 30 seconds of the train pulling away from the station.
Beautiful.
So then...
Wait, 30 minutes. 30 seconds after.
After.
Because
yes.
within you could have
yes,
made it.
within, no,
but
yeah,
after.
after. And so then I biked to the other train station in South Bend, which is the Amtrak station.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was trying to hold my phone as I navigated, and then that's when I ended up getting the frost nip, and then got in time just to see that train pull
Seriously?
away as well. Yeah,
What a great
so
story.
It's great. Yeah, in the morning I managed
what a
to
beautiful
miss
experience.
two trains.
This is
in
when
one go.
This
yeah.
is when you think I have, Zach and Sally, friends who
See,
live in
I know
South Bend,
I should have. It
who
was
have
like,
a car.
I know it was like 7 a.m. on a Monday.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, we're awake. We're
I know,
parents of
that's
little
true.
kids.
Yeah,
We're awake
yeah.
at 7 a.m. Yeah.
But South Bend has been great, I should say.
Good.
Yeah, that
Well,
was probably the.
we hope you come back. We know you have big plans ahead, and you won't be coming back here at least for many months. But that is true, right? You
That
won't be
is
coming
true.
back?
Yeah, that's the plan for now. Yeah,
because
quick
you're headed
change,
to Texas.
Texas.
You're a Texan
That's right.
from there originally.
Yeah.
What will you be
that's right,
doing
That's right.
in Austin?
So I'm headed back for these 2 weeks now to go spend some time with my family in College Station. And then I'll be landing in Austin this fall to start teaching at the University of Texas in January. Yeah, starting as an assistant professor in intellectual
excited
history.
for you.
Oh
gonna be
man,
great.
me too. I'm very, very blessed. It's
I
a great
think,
opportunity.
I mean, some people who listen to this podcast know because I've talked about it before, but I
yeah.
taught ROTC
at UT.
at UT. And
Yeah.
so I love that campus.
It's so great.
Love those students. I have so many good memories
Yeah, right
from
on.
there. And I'm really excited for you. It's a great opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah.
Let's back up a little bit. You've been on the podcast before because you came
That's
on
right.
at least one of our
That's
What a Week
right.
segments.
Yeah, with
that
Andrew.
I was doing with Andrew for a
Yeah,
while
with Andrew.
before he got a new job and our lives got a bit crazier.
yeah.
But we used to do that weekly. You came on at least one of those, maybe two. But
Mm.
give us a background kind of who you are, and then we can talk about how you and I got in touch and all of that. But,
Yeah, absolutely.
who is Lauren Spohn?
Oh my gosh. Well, I actually feel the least qualified to answer that question. I do feel like biographies should be, left to future generations to write. But from what I can say, my dad was an Air Force flight surgeon. And so this is the first thing we have in common.
That's
yeah,
right.
he was class of 1990. And so
At the Air Force Academy.
At the Academy, that's right. And so I grew up kind of all over, bouncing between different bases. So I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and
There's not a base there now.
no. He
Yeah.
was in medical school there at the other UT. Funny enough.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And then we
UT the lesser. as they say.
well, yeah, I'm already a black sheep for going UT with a family in College Station,
Right,
so I
yeah,
can't
'cause
rub it in
that's
too
where
much.
your parents are now,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. So then we spent some time in San Antonio and then back to Colorado Springs, Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi, where my mom is from, Mississippi. And then we ended up in Texas. And so in College Station is where I did middle school and high school. One older sister by 2 years, a proud aunt now 2 times over, and soon to be 3.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I
she and
didn't
her
know that.
husband live in
Congrats.
East Texas. So that's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wait,
And,
how old are the nieces and nephews?
They're about 2 and 4,
Okay.
both nephews, but the third is a niece. So it should be great
Okay,
fun.
exciting.
Yeah.
Very
so
cool.
sketch of the
So
family.
this will be first granddaughter for the parents.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So finally, all of my sister and our toys, like the ones my mom has managed
all
to hang on to.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
We showered on the little niece.
Nice.
So yeah, but let's see what else.
Undergrad at Harvard.
Yeah, 2016, 2020.
Yep.
Lucky class, graduating in the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, but it hit your senior second semester.
That's
so
right.
At least you got 7 semesters of being
That's
residence.
true.
Right?
That's a good way of looking at it.
Because it's kind of crazy. These kids who started school in 2019
and just got it chopped in half by COVID or started in the pandemic.
The stories I've heard are insane.
Totally.
From people who basically didn't go to college for 2 years.
That's right.
And just did Zoom classes.
Nuts.
Or when they did go to campus, they had to meet all the, not just the vaccine mandates, but also like all the ridiculous hygiene things and doing hybrid stuff.
Social bubbles.
Maybe in class once a week, but the rest of the time would be Zoom.
It's
and then
crazy.
Yeah. Just
they're kind of zombie years, aren't they? Yeah.
That's exactly. I mean, I look back frequently on those years and just think, what were we thinking? Yeah.
It's almost like, walking down the stairs and missing the last 2 steps. It's kind of like those 2 years. I often think, oh, wow. But,
I think it's really crazy, though. I mean, it's awful to think about all the kids in primary school who missed out on crucial, critical years of education.
Or looking at teachers with masks on their face.
Yeah, for sure. There's so much learning loss. The collective learning loss in our country and around the world is staggering from that. Yeah. But it's absurd to a different degree or on a different level to think about kids who, at Harvard, for example, are spending $60,000 to $70,000 a year for their education so that they can sit in mom and dad's basement on a Zoom call doing school.
I know, right?
Like, what?
Oh my gosh.
I think if I had a kid, and I know some people who did this, but if I had a kid who was in college at the time, I just would have said, just come out, like just pull out, come home, work for a year or a year and a half. Like, let's ride out the pandemic that way, because I'm not paying.
I think that would be the way to do it.
$75,000 for you to do that.
Totally
Crazy.
Like go woodwork for a year.
Yeah, go
and then
learn a trade.
Yeah, and then you'll probably come back
with a plumber.
Yeah,
or something.
Exactly. Yeah. That would have been a good. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Catastrophes force you to like clarify your first principles.
Yes.
And
that's exactly right.
My distinct memory was turning in my senior thesis on the Monday and just feeling the breeze of freedom. It's like, finally I'll have my senior spring at Harvard. Yeah, and then I get the email from Larry back out the next morning. So if you guys could pack up and leave campus in the next 5 days, that'd be great.
My goodness.
It was nuts. It was like apocalypse.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was...
I know there's already grade inflation at Harvard, but I imagine that no one was grading seriously.
That's right.
That final semester anyway.
That's basically...
Which is good. I mean, I remember I had senioritis my last semester pretty badly.
Fair enough. Because you already were a Rhodes at that point, right?
Yeah.
So you had that plan.
As were you, right?
Yes,
so,
that's right.
Yeah, and that's how you and I ultimately met. Is
right,
I saw you on the list of people selected for a Rhodes Scholarship, and I always read through the bios.
Yeah.
Actually, I've done this less frequently now, but I used to read through all the bios of the new scholars just to kind of see the direction of the scholarships and what kinds of people are being selected for it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's what you would think. It's just like the people who are sort of engaging in the most recent popular sort
progressive
of
intersectional
progressive scholarship.
Yeah, right.
Like people who are like, they're leading their LGBTQ plus club in their school, or they've started some organization to help. It's
really more activism than scholarship. Yeah, exactly. A lot of times.
That's how it is. But I remember reading your bio, and there were some lines in it that told me, I think this person is a Christian, including you had written for the Harvard Ichthus, which is the Christian magazine, student-run magazine or newspaper. So I remember reaching out to you and saying, hey, I assume you're a Christian. I'm a Christian as well. Let me know if you have any questions about sort of how to stay plugged in at Oxford and whatnot.
Yes. And you also said I converted to the Catholic Church while I was over there. Watch out for the ghost of St. John Henry Newman.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a great segue, because what ended up happening, to tell your story more briefly than I want you to tell it in a moment, you ended up converting to Catholicism.
That's right. Yeah.
And then not just that, but the ghost of St. John Henry Newman got you so badly that, or so well, I should say, that you ended up writing your doctoral dissertation on
that's right.
John Henry Newman.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
So tell us how that happened.
It's nice, like all the curves in the river kind of turn straight at 20,000 feet. So like on the ground, it was a much more winding journey than that.
You didn't mention this, but you're a pilot, so
I am. That's right. That's
an apt metaphor for you.
Well, that was the COVID summer. Yeah.
That's what you did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Good social distancing.
Had you already have some aviation experience?
No, that's the crazy thing. Yeah, so I was back at home kind of moping. Well, it's interesting. I two great gifts came out of that crazy pandemic time. Many did, but two that come to mind right now. I joined a reading group on Newman's idea of a university on Zoom.
So this was before Oxford.
This was before Oxford. Yeah, this was like the spring of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, because Javier Gonzalez, who was another Harvard Rhodes Scholar coming a couple years before me, had made friends with Dr. Paul Shrimpton, who is a great Newman scholar based in Oxford. And he was running the reading group on Newman. And Javier was like, oh, Lauren, why don't you join this? And so at this point, I was so desperate to, start the Oxford life. So I joined, and that was my first exposure to Newman. And Paul and I have since become great friends. And he was the one who took me up to the Birmingham Oratory Archives, actually, to find a Newman manuscript that ended up being very central to my doctoral dissertation. Good. So anyway.
I remember you telling me about that trip and just what it was like to be in Birmingham. But we never made the trip up there. We obviously went to the Oxford Oratory a lot when we were there, but not to Birmingham. So
yeah. Well, yeah, it's amazing. I'll get to that later. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but that summer it was my dad's recommendation that I go for a discovery flight at this, Easterwood Airport, the local airport in College Station. Jumped into 172 in the left seat, and it was just
amazing.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I won't.
When was the last time you flew?
Oh gosh, a couple of years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah, last time I was in Texas.
How long is your license current before you have to re-up?
Oh, I just need to do 3 touch and goes.
Okay.
Before I can take passengers up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'd probably want to work on my instrument. That's kind of my goal in the next couple of years.
Are you instrument rated now?
No, I'm still VFR right now.
Okay.
So, one thing at a time.
Yeah, for sure. But, I mean, I'm not a pilot, even though I was in the Air Force. I obviously have a ton of friends who are. Huh. And these friends fly the cool planes.
Oh my gosh.
The A-10 or the F-35 or the F-22, just F-16s. Super cool stuff. Yeah. But it's always blown my mind how you do instrument rating. Even when you ride in a passenger airline.
All analog too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, it can be all analog. Now not so much.
It's not
but
often, but they need to be trained that way in case
they totally need to be
electrical
trained
failure.
That way.
But the fact that you can take off in basically zero visibility and then land in zero visibility. I mean, it's always impressive when we're coming in on approach, just riding on an airline flight. Coming in on approach and there's just fog out the window. You can't see anything, and then the fog finally breaks like 20 feet under the 20 feet above the runway, and the runway's right there.
Right,
how do we do that? That's really impressive.
Yeah, so totally.
Kudos to those pilots.
It's been interesting too because, and I don't want to jump the gun too much, but Newman is one of these people who I think you see with your whole self reading his work, partially because he's unsystematic, but also because he absorbed everything. I mean, he went to geology lectures, he was a musician, he was a great walker. And one of the things that has really struck me focusing on his work for my dissertation is how often navigational metaphors recur throughout his prose. Yeah, so I'm working on the Grammar of Assent, which is kind of his big philosophical work on the nature of faith and reason. And in many ways, he ends up trying to understand what are the natural laws by which the mind works in the concrete and concrete circumstances, reasoning about questions like, how do I know that Great Britain is an island? Or, how do I make a judgment and situations of uncertainty? Yeah. It's totally the kinds of decision making that a pilot has to make. You're always taking in data from ways that, you can't always articulate you're doing your cross checks and all the rest. Yeah. And I feel like I've been particularly attuned to the way he talks about the mind reasoning as trying to find the right vantage point of a landscape.
Yes. And
then seeing finally the point where the whole is unveiled. So you see each part in relation to the whole and the whole in relation to each part.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think that the only reason I've been attuned to that is because I love running, and like navigating through space, and also I've had to think a lot about navigation because of the pilot training. So yeah. Anyway, but that was the summer of 2020. And then did my first year at Oxford, the fall of 2020 to 21. Yeah, I did a master's in intellectual history.
And that was a 1 year.
It was a 1 year MST. That's right. And it was pandemic Oxford, and so
So by fall 2020, was it mostly Zoom as well at that point?
Yeah, it was mostly Zoom. I got picked up.
I think we talked about this. Did they give you the option, the Rhodes Trust? Did they give you the option of deferring?
Oh, good question. I don't think they officially offered that. I mean, there were some people who did defer,
because
from
of
what
COVID?
I understand. Yeah. But it wasn't something they advertised.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you end up going there, but you're not in classes.
That's right.
You're sitting in your flat.
Yeah, that's right. About a mile and a half north of the Dreaming Spires.
Oh, were you up on Cowley? Or
I was actually in Summertown.
So wait, what's Cowley's out to the
Cowley
east,
is out.
Right?
That's right. Okay, yeah, kind of southeast.
Yeah. So you were living in Summertown.
Yeah, I was living in Summertown and Merrifield, which was college accommodations for Wadham. Yeah, and
you chose poorly for your college.
So here's the thing: I didn't choose. So I wanted to be in Magdalen College, of course, because this is the C.S. Lewis connection, and there's a Deer Park, and it's Bell Tower, and it's beautiful.
Magdalen's great.
Yes,
it's top 3 for sure.
Were you? Wait, remind me what college
you
were.
If I had known what I knew afterward, though, I definitely would have gone to St. John's.
Yeah,
because they had all the money.
Totally.
And it probably would have been St. John's, Magdalen. Christchurch is beautiful.
It is.
It's massive. I mean, probably too big. Like I like the sort of intimacy of a college. I mean, Christchurch is where the Harry Potter movies in the dining hall were filmed.
That's right, the grand staircase.
But Christchurch is also very undergrad heavy. There is a graduate student presence, but it's so many undergrads. So it just has a rather sophomoric vibe to it.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And
that's
so,
it's a little touristy too, because a lot of people go to see the Grand Quad and the Tom Tower and all the rest.
So St. John's, Magdalen, I think would have been good choice.
Yeah.
So you tried to go Magdalen.
I tried to go Magdalen, and in classic British fashion, I was told there are no spots available because it is oversubscribed by Rhodes Scholars. I'm afraid it's an oversubscribed. Yes. So we're just going to put you in Wadham College.
I mean, who's gone to Wadham?
I know.
Like most people don't know that as an Oxford college. It's very forgotten.
Rowan Williams actually went to Wadham. Yeah.
Any other illustrious alumni?
None come to mind, I'm afraid. So I very quickly discovered that more conservative leaning or just like more religious type people refer to it as Wadham and Gomorrah. So I think that kind of like summarizes most of it. Yeah, it's one of the more modern colleges. It's, to be fair, lovely people at Wadham. I mean, it's beautiful grounds.
It's a very different model than American education.
Yes,
and so for listeners who aren't familiar with Oxford or Cambridge, the college at which you attend really has very little bearing on your academic experience.
At the grad level.
Which is what we were doing, So your faculty are in the faculty at the university level, and so your advisor is unlikely to be at your college. Most of your seminar instructors, faculty members are unlikely to be at your college, but it does affect your social life because you'll be in the middle common room or the graduate common room. You'll dine with your college mates, etc. So it's more determinant of your social life than your academic life for the graduate students.
Yeah. Though I have to say, in the COVID year, the social life was basically the emails that I got in my inbox. Yeah. So, I didn't meet my supervisor in person until the last day of that year. We were just and I was in Oxford, right? But we were just Zooming. Yeah. And so, there was, what else? I quarantined for 2 weeks in the dorm, ran like 0.1 mile loops around the compound. Just felt like a hamster. It was pretty rough.
That's really bad.
Yeah, I have to say though, I mean, I still remember the first run that I took after the quarantine was lifted. I just felt like Rapunzel coming out of the tower.
So were you not allowed to actually run around town?
No, not for those 2 weeks.
Would the police have stopped you?
We just had a very vigilant, guard.
Porter.
House manager. Unfortunately, not a porter.
Okay.
Because the porter, I guess the porter, maybe he was just like a manager. We called him. Yeah. Okay. And so and the gates were so slow and creaky that there was just no way that.
So you literally, if you had gone to the gate and said, I want to go on a run, they would have said,
nope.
No, you can't leave.
Yeah, that's right. So.
What could you leave for? Grocery shopping?
Not even that. I think we had our groceries delivered.
I mean, it's such a wild time.
It's such a wild time.
Wow.
Now we could, step outside the door and clap for the NHS. This was kind of required.
Yes, right. You have to pay homage to the local DBs.
Yeah, and for some reason, unclear, they had the rainbow as their NHS symbol.
What?
So I have no idea how that worked out. But June month was unclear whether it was like Pride celebrations or NHS celebrations.
Maybe the NHS was just temporarily appended to the LGBTQ acronym. So it's like the LGBTQ NHS.
The human shield that we're all building around the NHS. So wait a second.
That's hilarious.
It's a crazy time.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a very strange year. But
So that was your whole first year, first master's.
I have to say, that was my first fall. So that was the Michaelmas term. Yeah. And then I ended up, it was an interesting time. I think that I was still unclear really what I wanted to study. Mm-hmm. I had been an English major in undergrad, but I always roamed around the philosophy and the history departments and worked with professors in various places, and ended up falling in love really with the history of ideas, mostly through a sophomore seminar that I took. It was like the history of literary criticism. And I took it with a great writer and American historian, Luke Menand. And he told us, it was like 15 of us in the class. And he said, read T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, The Wasteland, and then come in with questions. Great opening. And he said, and we'll build a syllabus from that. And
I've never read The Wasteland.
Oh, yes. You should.
Okay.
Shanti. April is the cruelest month, and here we are.
Yeah.
You know, maybe in South Bend, that's the case. He's just teasing you with spring, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we came in.
The Four Quartets is a poetry work, right?
That's right. Yeah, but that came later in Eliot's career.
Is the Wasteland
The Wasteland's earlier. Yes, it is a poem. That's right. Yeah, it's in his kind of high modernist phase, coming after the love song, and then. It's interesting. A lot of modernists kind of love the early Eliot and don't like the later kind of converted
Is it because,
Eliot.
he became a Christian, basically?
Yeah. So anyway, the kinds of questions we were asking of the Wasteland.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
He's seen as very English.
Right. It's a kind of Anglophile.
He was born in Missouri, right?
Yeah, so totally.
He was born in Missouri, moved to England, and then sort of adopted everything.
Didn't come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he submitted his Harvard philosophy PhD and just didn't bother coming back for the defense.
I assume, based on how much he loved England and how much he identified himself as an Englishman, that he even adopted an accent, but I could be wrong on that.
I think he's a kind of transatlantic.
Okay.
One of those types.
Yeah.
You can actually hear recordings of him reading Proof Rock, for example, on YouTube. Yes. Yeah. It's kind of quirky.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's
That's
fun,
exactly what I
though.
would expect.
Yeah,
so
it kind of would have to be
Missouri
that,
boy
right?
Goes full subject.
Full. Right. Yeah, it goes native question mark. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, sorry.
So
continue.
no. I mean, the kinds of questions we were asking in this seminar were, who was T.S. Eliot, and does his biography matter for interpreting this poem? What do we do with the footnotes? How do we think about the relationship between East and West in The Wasteland? Does it help us interpret what the poem means by placing it in the city of London when he says unreal city, unreal city? So it was basically meta questions of literary study, which was thinking philosophically about texts, which led naturally into thinking about hermeneutics, which is the process of interpreting texts. And I fell in love really with this because it was so interesting to think about how various generations of literary critics, from the new critics all the way up to the kind of new historicists of the Stephen Greenblatt type approach, making or finding, developing, coming to understand the meaning of a text. And then you would have scholars come in and actually have a live dialogue with Luke as they talked about their different approaches. So Skip Gates, Stephen Greenblatt, Sharon Marcus, big
I don't
people.
Know any of these names, by the way,
they're no worries. They're kind of like big figures in literary studies, and so it was making approaches live.
You mentioned
basically.
Stephen Greenblatt, and new historicists.
Right.
What is a new historicist critique?
So
what does that mean?
It's the way that Stephen described it when he came into our seminar was that he wanted to, if the text was a house, he wanted to open the window and kind of see what was outside. And the idea is really reading a text in conversation with the cultural context
in which the text arose.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then also trying to understand how the text kind of reflects and refracts that culture. So it's really more of a kind of.
So this is kind of like the historical critical method?
I think I would say a different emphasis.
Okay.
So the historical critical method would be more trying to understand the kind of conditions of production around a text. So how did it come to be? How did it get knit together? What are various edits that I've made by different people? How do we get to what we have today when we pluck, say, the Bible off the shelf and open it to read? As the new historicist would put it, it's more of a kind of cultural poetics.
Okay.
Where you're looking at the text and then trying to understand what was happening in Shakespeare's England such that we could get the gravedigger scene in Hamlet, for example. Like, how were beliefs about purgatory changing, and how does something like Hamlet's malaise reflect those cultural shifts?
Okay, so almost less of a mechanistic, how did this come about?
Yeah.
And more, what does this say about the prevailing culture that was
That's
there?
right. So it's really anthropology.
Yeah.
It's a kind of cultural poetics, as Greenblatt would describe it. But
and that is the new historicism.
That's the new historicism. Yeah. Okay. It's so funny. Wow. So kind of going back with this. But I just mentioned this because there was something, I think, to me, not magical, but in a way totally amazing to think about a text as having a very open-ended meaning. So it's not as if there's no meaning at all in the wasteland.
Yeah.
But, and this is actually very T.S. Eliot, this idea of tradition and the individual talent, whereby we have a base text, let's call it the Odyssey. Okay. And we read it one way when we're, in 6th century BC, let's say. Obviously, we wouldn't be reading it. It starts off as an oral poetry, but, it gets written down. Yeah, exactly. So you're experiencing the text one way for this at this point in time. But then after, Alexander Pope writes his translation, you read it a different way. And then when Fitzgerald comes along and translates it again, you read it a different way. And all the texts that are borrowing from Homer, all the way up to like Joyce's Ulysses, let's say, are in a conversation such with each other and with the base text, right? And with Homer. Yeah. So one can't actually post Joyce's Ulysses, go back and read Homer the same way. Yes. So as Eliot describes it, there's always a kind of reordering and a reinterpreting of the tradition as it grows. Right. And so what's crazy about this is that, I almost think about the meaning of a text as being like a funnel or a cone, right? Okay. That's like opening up, or maybe a tornado, this kind of cyclonic image. It doesn't narrow over time. It broadens over time. Yeah. And so it's difficult because there's a way of reading that where it's so relativistic. You're never quite getting to the meaning of things. Whereas actually the meaning is the ongoing process of starting from the base, right? You don't negate the base based on the fact that the base text, the base event, what have you. You don't negate it by the fact that it is radically open-ended, but it's always the tradition reading itself and unfolding more and more ways of engaging, understanding, and carrying out the meaning of this thing in the performance of this ongoing, way of reading the text. And so, here I am as a Protestant, born and raised, coming against these ideas, which I really found reading Hans-Georg Gadamer, who's this 20th century hermeneutic philosopher, Protestant, interestingly enough, for this class. And I had a distinct moment on the top floor of Widener Library, which is Harvard's main library, like reading these, like, oh my gosh, the meaning of a text is radically open-ended, and realizing, okay, all well and good when we're talking about Eliot's Wasteland, but what about the Constitution? What about the Bible? So suddenly I had built my whole kind of devotional life, as my parents very wonderfully taught me, reading 2 chapters of the Bible every morning and then just trusting that the Holy Spirit would guide me all the way through. And so,
which, you could do worse.
You totally could do worse. And like, you owe 90% of your vocation to your parents, but it destabilizes a little bit. Yeah. And it makes one kind of question.
Your kind of Protestant mind I guess there are a variety of Protestant hermeneutics to be fair, but your mind at the time was building your devotional life around the Bible on the assumption that this sort of the meaning of this text is clear and is static, perhaps.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And then so understanding, having your mind open to this possibility that there is sort of the like inverse funnel, that the sort of meaning expands over time. Yeah. I can see how that would be destabilizing. But I think it's I don't know. I can imagine someone listening to this or watching this and thinking like, well, the meaning either has to stop somewhere, like the funnel has to stop expanding, because if it continues to expand endlessly, then the essential truth of what's there ends up getting diluted until it is meaningless. And at the same time, you need to make sure that like the base of the funnel remains the base of the funnel. Right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, so as you talk about this, though, I can see where your interest took you to Newman, because I think about development of doctrine and all of that. So how would you respond to that critique of this new perspective that you are encountering, that if we expand it too much, it ceases to be meaningful at all.
Yeah. I mean, I could be very Newmanian and say I'd want an example of this, but to kind of sink the teeth in a little bit more. But I should maybe, before I directly talk about this, maybe a helpful way of putting it is, it's not as if my Protestant mind was thinking, when I glean the meaning of what I'm reading from the Bible, I'm picking up the meaning from the shelf, like I'm picking a book from the book shelf, right? This was just a kind of radically different way of thinking about what it means to be human, because suddenly meaning is much more of a relationship.
Interesting.
It's a relationship between me and the text, me and the author. I am a kind of participant in the process of unfolding what the meaning is. Meaning is a kind of encounter between me and the text. It's me encountering it at different points in time. And so I'm kind of encountering the previous ways that I've read it. I'm also encountering it with everyone else who's interpreted it before, right? So suddenly it's much less of me as one person using my mind to glean and grasp whatever is here, like picking up an object, and much more of a kind of communal enterprise.
Yeah.
The meaning is performed and carried on and actually gets richer and deeper. And so as this performance continues, and so as you can imagine, I was deeply destabilized by all of this and didn't really have an adequate answer, and went to an Episcopal priest at the Harvard Divinity School and asked him, how do I fix my hermeneutic crisis? And his response was, the Holy Spirit intervenes.
This is very,
this totally.
Is very on brand for an Episcopal priest. Yeah.
Totally. And so I was like, okay, I can get on board with that. I'm not going to think too hard about how do I make sense of all the other ways that the Holy Spirit seems to be guiding a lot of people in a lot of very radically different directions. Fine. It's also a little bit abstract,
His advice?
The advice.
Right.
Yeah, in the sense of just kind of trust. Okay, fair enough. The unity is there, even though I can't see it. Yeah. I can just trust that it's invisible over here. So, I mean, to make a long story short, there were a lot of other intervening factors that came as I was reading more history, for example, before 1776 and 1517. I started getting into the work of Charles Taylor as I was doing my master's in intellectual history, and also met some really amazing Catholic friends who ended up being the only people hosting events in person, at Pandemic Oxford. And I went back, spent some time with family, applied for a bunch of consulting internships, got them, and then realized I didn't really want to do them. So there was a whole journey of trying to discover, what do I do now that it's not really clear what the next ladder is on this achievement rung that I've been climbing more or less my whole life. I need a guidance that's more than abstract, that's something concrete that I can see show up in my daily experience. I need God to talk to me, and in a way that's way more involved than me simply just kind of getting this life advice for a couple of minutes in the morning when I read. So anyway, I kind of found my way to Newman. I was, in this Newman reading group too with Paul Shrimpton, kept up the whole year. And it was really coming across his essay on the development of Christian doctrine that turned what was a question, how do I make sense of the fact that meaning is so open with the Bible, with the Christian tradition? It turned that question into the answer itself. And really the line that kind of hit me like a hammer blow was in the essay in the first part, which is basically Newman's just philosophy of ideas, where he talks about the meaning of any idea is the sum total of all its possible aspects. And there is no more complex idea in history than the fact that God became man.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it make sense that we need a lot of time to fully unfold what this means? And he also has a beautiful image where he talks about how, there's one way of thinking about ideas such that they're purest at their source, and you get the clearest sense of what it is, close to the event or the text or this or what have you. But in this case, he proposes the strength, the reality of an idea is actually tested by how broad and deep and wide the river is. away from the source.
Yeah, I think this answers the first of my two objections.
Yeah.
Right? Because the first one was, and I mean, these are, like, I'm voicing these objections, but I don't.
Right.
I'm voicing them.
No, please. I think it's super helpful. Yeah,
so the first of my objections was, well, if it continues to expand over time, eventually it just is sort of diluted so as to become meaningless. But with what you just said, it's evident that if we have an infinitely complex idea, like the incarnation, really any idea that involves God's activity.
And an event, right? So not just an idea, but historically.
If we have sort of an expansion of meaning related to an event, or an idea in which God is involved, then that has an infinitude of meaning. Yeah. And so it wouldn't just take a long time for us to exhaust all aspects of the incarnation. We literally could not, because it is infinitely complex.
That's right. Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily apply to everything, right? So like if I wrote a poem and the poem was called "The Fire Engine is Red," and the poem was literally just like the fire engine is red, like that does not have an infinite number of meanings.
Well. Yeah, I don't know. You kind of push the pale of, is this a useful exercise after a while? Yeah. Because there's a kind of formal sense in which, like, well, technically, you could probably say that you could keep coming up with more and more abstruse ways of reading it. So, but here's the thing, though. I think this brings up a really important point, because in a way, there is this is why I use funnel, right? Because there is a sense in which some interpretations just cease to be meaningful, useful, helpful, plausible.
Inside the funnel.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's, is there a way of, I'm trying to think of a good example here, but like, is there a way of reading Cars, let's say, as a kind of, a postmodern critique of small town America? Like, probably some very clever graduate student could write a paper about that and pick up enough details from the film to like make that case. But on the whole, which is a term that recurs frequently in Newman, it's like, that's kind of outside the funnel. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, you have to really stretch the bounds of what's valid here to make that make sense. And so it's always a judgment called, though, because in this kind of inquiry, it's not something one mediates through syllogisms or tests with mathematical proofs. It's not a question so much of like, is it true? Is it false? It's, is it valid? Is it a real interpretation? This is why Newman also talks about is Christianity as being real. Real in the sense of evident in nature, answering the questions that come up over the course of human history, as we can see in the data of experience.
So I think that then is getting to my second objection, which was the sort of like, it has to be grounded on something real. Right. And then you like very appropriately said, I want an example. So this is probably reaching as an example anyway, but you mentioned the Episcopal priests, right? If you talk to Episcopalians, you will learn, I mean, you know this, but anyone who talks to an Episcopalian will learn that there are many acceptable beliefs within the sort of Episcopalian umbrella. Right. And so you can find people who identify as practicing Episcopalians, people who commune at their church every Sunday, who would say to you, the resurrection of Christ was not a physical event, right? Yeah. And so you can read, let's take the text of the resurrection accounts in the Gospels. You can read those, and it is pretty clear to me, and it has been, I would argue, to 99.999% of the Christian tradition, that those are referring to a real physical event. Yeah. You can find some kind of historical, critical, like exegesis of text today and other modernist exegesis that says, these are sort of like morally true stories of a resurrection, but they are true in an analogous sense in the way they describe the life of the sinner or whatever, but they're not actually referring to a real physical event. So, in that funnel, like that would be something that's sort of outside the bounds of the funnel. It's lost the source. It's lost the source. I would say. It has to be grounded.
It has to be grounded, right? So it's interesting. The center cannot hold, right? In that around and around the widening gyre. Right? That's right. Talking about Nietzsche's philosophy of history.
Oh, is that what he's referring to?
Yeah.
It makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, right? So you could say all of those allegorical or moral interpretations totally hold, but you've turned kind of Gnostic if you've lost the real incarnate event, the historical base of where God is intervening in history. And I think that it's so funny. I feel like before I worked so closely on Newman, I was much more articulate about his ideas than I am now.
Because you just get sort of like muddled in
I think
Newmania?
Well, maybe. I would self-describe as a Newmaniac, but I think it's more that the truth is ultimately a kind of inarticulate thing. And if it
is an inarticulate
inarticulable thing.
The truth is articulable.
Well, by God, right? By the word, but not by us and all of its totality.
So to us, the truth is inarticulable.
Yeah, well, I think in the way that Newman thinks, it's always, he recurs back to this motto of from St. Francis de Sales, which is cor ad cor, heart to heart, heart speaks unto heart, right? So there's the deepest mystery is the mystery of persons, right? Both inside and outside, more intimate to me than myself, and ever greater beyond me and transcendent above me, right?
Well, you may know this guy. He's a priest. I think it's a priest of Opus Dei who's a Newman scholar, and I remember reading a small book by him. Velez, maybe?
Yeah, Father Juan Velez. Okay. He's so great. He's very kind.
In the introduction to his book on, he probably has several, but in the book that I have of his on St. John Henry Newman, it's kind of like a little primer to the work of John Henry Newman.
Yeah.
And he says in the introduction to that he thinks Newman will be a doctor of the church, which
God really?
I've heard some rumors in that direction, but he says that he thinks when he is declared doctor, he will be a doctor of love because of his like core ad core emphasis. His emphasis on relationality and all of that. So when you said the core ad core, I think that's what it made me think of.
Yeah. And I think another way of putting it is that we always see in partial and incomplete glimpses, right? And Newman, I think, is he's wonderful at keeping polar opposites in creative tension, always oriented toward the encounter of persons created and divine.
Yeah.
So we approach God with both loving fear and fearing love. And as soon as you overemphasize or try to emphasize just the fearing love over the loving fear, you collapse the relationship, right? You either get a God who's, sinners in the hand of an angry God, or you get the kind of buddy Jesus who shows up at the end of Canticle for Lebowitz as like in a really kind of terrifying, unreal way. And so there's a sense in which we're always having to move almost liturgically from one to the other and never really encounter in any graspable form God as he himself actually is, right? So in that sense, I suppose replying to the skeptic or to the I think our kind of model Episcopalian who was saying that, oh, well, you can read it morally, you can read it allegorically, it's really instructing you on how to live your best ethical life. Yeah, that's part of the pole, right? Yes. But if you lose the real, you foreclose the truth. Similarly, if you just say, oh, it was merely a historical event, isn't that great? We can see the ripple effects in history. Something like Tom Holland's Dominion, would be a good example of this. But we're not going to treat it as pointing or gesturing towards anything outside of history. Then you're also foreclosing what is ultimately a whole and dynamic, inarticulable thing that can only be grasped and like kind of seen in partial aspects. And so all these objections are great because I think they articulate exactly as Newman kind of thinks through it in the essay, or at least as I read him, is, okay, so we need a kind of base of events, right? And we have this kind of the cone of plausibility. How do we? It's kind of like the cone of shame, that a dog would wear, but you're trying to apply it to hermeneutics.
That's good.
So how do you keep people together in this? Right? Like, how do you, if the church is supposed to be a bond of communion between persons, how is this arranged? Who makes the judgment about what's valid and what's not? And wouldn't it make sense that there would be a final judgment if the whole point of the church is to keep you? So,
right.
And then I think that's kind of one question. But again, it's taking all the objections and saying, where do they fit in the picture? The right picture, given the way that we observe things in the world, the fact that this is just an aspect of how we make sense out of texts and events, like just as humans, then how do we start to, wouldn't it make sense that the truth would have to incorporate these aspects of just our basic way of experiencing things? Also, who is the human person if this is the case? Suddenly it looks like we have a huge role to play unfolding the meaning of Revelation, right? Like this whole picture of persons as carrying on and like unfolding the meaning of Christ's incarnation. it makes the vocation of being a person so much higher and deeper than someone who's merely kind of,
on the receiving end.
On the receiving end of a kind of, attributed salvation. So you have a kind of an anthropology that's much richer and higher and freer and more dignified than anything I had come across before. And suddenly the truth is really not so much about what lives in the text and much more the kind of life and communion, core ad core, that the text inspires. And so suddenly Newman's vision of the church starts to make a lot more sense, right? So it's like the event of the incarnation, the communion of persons, the laying on of hands, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, guiding the judgment of the church, and then eventually the Pope to keep the unified judgment. And then just, it's like, wow, okay, like I'm starting to see how on this picture of the world, things are making a lot of sense. Yeah. And the kinds of objections that I had at the beginning are not merely addressed in a kind of verbal sense, but they're turned inside out and made the occasion of the real way forward. Yes. And so I think from reading the essay and kind of having those hermeneutic kind of issues reframed, I started to, it made me want to know more and want to see more. And I started to, just keep exploring. Now we're moving into like the spring of 2021 as I'm finishing up this master's in Oxford. And I think reading your conversion story, Zach, a lot of similar things started to happen. I just kept finding through a lot of seemingly unrelated and disparate ways that the answers or clarification came always knitted back to the church. Yeah. So critiques of meritocracy, right? Start to see how a lot of the liberal Protestant, like self-realizing individual self just didn't really make sense. It was an unreal anthropology. And a lot of the critiques coming from a kind of communitarian political framework were harmonizing perfectly with Catholic social doctrine, which couldn't be pinned down, right, as either right or left. Catholic social teaching started to make a lot more sense. The anthropology coming from Augustine and JP2 also making a lot of sense. Devotion to Mary, like helping my own relationship with my mother, making a lot of sense. Yeah. And just the peace that I started to feel as I was taking my own prayer life seriously. It's all of these data points that you often don't realize you're collecting to kind of go back to this decision making under uncertainty and how many factors come in that are just, you can't anticipate and really after the fact can only articulate when asked about, right? They kind of point to the reality of what's happening and they do not exhaust it. Yeah, that's just kind of what kept happening over and over again. And so, speed up to the June of 2021, I start going to daily mass with these great friends who I met and is also the witness of live Catholics. These are people my age who just are not chained to their resumes, in a way that I felt like I had been, who were free to host dinner parties for their friends and take summers to go work on farms and all that. And you see it. This is also a very Newmanian point. When a holy person walks in the room, there's just a presence that they have that makes them, as Newman would say, like kind of repellent to people who can't really conceptualize or grasp what it is that's different about them, and just makes them inexplicably attractive to people who are seeking. Like, what do you have? I want it. Can you please tell me what makes you the way you are? So I had that experience too. The more friends that I found, and then I was working for a time in venture capital. It's kind of a bit of a pivot after intellectual history, though not as much as one would think.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
And
depending on the VC,
right? Yeah, and I don't know. I think I started to see a bit of a reductio ad absurdum of the hyper individualistic, materialistic way of seeing the self, and just came to realize as I woke up before work to read more theology and read more, history, philosophy, and all the rest, that wow, the pieces really are starting to come together. And it's interesting talking to friends still. I think you reach a certain point where you just trust the church and you trust that the kinds of things that you would think of as an objection are really just difficulties.
Yeah.
And that you'll probably come to realize or see the meaning behind why certain doctrines are the way they are from inside the church and the communion much better than you could from the outside.
Well, this is, I mean, you would know better than me, but to my recollection, Newman talks about the difficulties and doubts thing.
That's
and
right.
He says, I think 10,000 difficulties make not one doubt.
That's right.
And his example is, I think it's his example, working on, a pupil working on sums for a math assignment.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know the answer.
He's
like struggling to find the answer, but he doesn't think there must be no answer.
Right.
He has difficulties with it, but he knows there is an answer.
And why does he know? Because there's a system that he's working within, right? Like he's been trained to think mathematically and to solve other kinds of problems. Right. And he trusts that process and he sees that there's a reason. And the way that Newman talks about it in the essay on development is that it is precisely the witness of the coherence, cohesion, and historical reality of the development of doctrine over time. And you can point to, typologies between the Old and New Testament that then grow into doctrines of the church. So like Levitical sacrifices to then Christ's, death on the cross and resurrection, the representation of this mystery in the Mass, the magnification of the veneration of Our Lady over time as the new Eve and as the Theotokos. And so he has these great, these notes of the church that help kind of illuminate where exactly are we seeing the coherence as well as the historical reality of this majestic growth, as he calls it. And it's the witness of that living body over time that is ultimately the argument for the spiritual presence of the church guiding her through time. So again, it's not, oh wow, look, the Catholics got it right.
Right.
It's God's at work in the church. And he's not at work,
and that's why the Catholics
got it right. Yeah, that's right. And then it's kind of it leaves you with something like, the church is right because she's the church.
Right.
And so it's like, whoa, yeah. And again, someone who's not a little mean-spirited can come up and say, I knew it was circular the whole time. So, yeah. Yeah, right.
That's a great intellectual path to conversion, though. So you became Catholic when?
December 2021.
December 21.
Yeah, and I would say, that's the kind of like intellectual way of telling some of the highlights. Of course, it always involves a lot more than just that.
It must involve more than just the intellect, because as you've said, channeling Newman a lot, it is actually about a relation of persons.
Totally.
And I think that's something that being Protestant, growing up Protestant, for me, helped me in becoming Catholic, is in knowing already, instinctively, but also through formation from my parents, that the faith is not strictly an intellectual commitment.
Yes.
And it is actually, before anything, it is a volitional commitment.
Yeah.
It's an act of the will.
Yeah.
Read the heart towards someone.
Yeah.
And it involves a relationship. Protestants are often talking about the relationship with Jesus. And one of the critiques towards Catholics, in many cases rightly so, is that they forget that it's about a relationship.
Yeah.
And so coming from the Protestant side, you don't have that struggle. It's not strictly an intellectual thing. I think my challenge, and it sounds like yours, was not, I don't feel like I have a relationship with God. It was more of me not understanding the intellectual commitments that Protestants have to make. And ultimately finding myself disagreeing with those intellectual commitments and realizing that there are better ones and truer ones that Catholics are committed to.
Yeah.
But having the relationship understanding already in place was immensely helpful for me.
Totally. Yeah. Gosh, there's so many things to say.
Yeah. Well, I know that we have limited time.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
So I want to get a couple other things.
Good thing to limit us.
You become Catholic in December 21.
That's right.
Well, you have to come back on the show. We can talk about more of this stuff. But you're finishing your dissertation now.
That's right.
Are you officially done? I know you did drop one.
I'm proofreading.
Okay, cool. So almost done.
Almost done.
Done in a matter of weeks.
Yes.
/ months.
Hopefully
weeks.
Before Easter, hopefully.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's right around the corner.
I know.
We're recording this on Passion Sunday. So you're done with that soon. I know you have a couple creative projects in the works. We haven't even talked about this at all yet, but you're also a filmmaker. So first, give us a little bit of background. Maybe talk about Confession Well, no.
Oh, Absolution.
Absolutely. Thank you. I knew it was some penitential related thing. I forgot the exact title.
That's it.
Yeah, short film
Very
Absolution.
blatantly appropriate. Yeah.
So talk about your kind of your past creative projects, and then I want to ask you about the upcoming couple ones.
Yeah, of course. So I've always loved movies. I grew up on kind of OG Disney, and I fell in love with Pixar when I was a kid.
Of course.
And
Pixar's gone downhill.
I know, OG. So, Ratatouille, Bugs Life,
we already mentioned
Incredibles.
Cars in this conversation.
Yes. Well, we were having a chat about cars over pancakes.
Yeah.
So I had to bring it up.
My 4-year-old, Dominic,
That's
said that was one of his favorite movies.
Rightfully so.
Yeah,
it's a great film. Yeah. So the new Pixar movie would come out around my birthday every year. So it always felt like a birthday gift.
Was it summer releases?
It was fall.
Okay.
Yeah, around November.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, cool. For at least Incredibles and Ratatouille.
Yeah.
There's distinct memories for those.
I remember also just getting so hyped for every Pixar release because they were so great.
They were so great. And what I loved about them is they brought you into a new world with every film.
Yeah.
And
or back in like Toy Story 2, like back into the world that you loved. Yeah.
With characters who are real and had real problems, except, realer than how do we continue to make money off old theme park rides.
Right.
So yeah, I would say that's kind of what I fell in love with. And running, or as an Air Force kid, you always move around a lot, and so this idea of opening up new worlds, it's really kind of always captivated me.
Yeah.
And so would make movies with my sister in the backyard. She would always steal my writing credits, and I'm not bitter about it at all. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. So anyway, I've always wanted to make
just
films.
like with a camcorder.
Like Canon PowerShot and our neighborhood kids.
Yeah,
that's right. That's so cool. So it's always something I wanted to do. Studied English Lit in undergrad, but I didn't. It's so interesting how it all kind of works together. I didn't have time for creative writing. I didn't make time for it. And this was part of the conversion, actually. Suddenly realizing that, wow, the new conversion always comes with the new world. And, we talk about the relationship between persons. And Ratzinger also talks about this as the kind of, well, you hear it, let me pin that for a second. It's a kind of I-thou relationship when one is in prayer, right, with Christ, and starting to understand oneself anew in light of the other. But it's also, especially in Christological terms, it's a kind of I, thou, we, right? So it's God loving you and then sending you out into the world just as he sent Christ. And this is the Ratzinger point that he makes, like the idea of a person as being sent on a mission.
Where does he talk about
also,
this?
This is a Communio article on like the idea of personhood or something like this. So, but that idea of an I, thou, we, with the new identity always coming with a mission, a relation to the world and the world, Christ in and beyond the world, right? So I suppose that when I started creative writing again after the conversion, it was like, wow, this is suddenly a new thing. This is not like me trying to reflect on my own experience or my own kind of narrative of identity or whatever. This is trying to go out and see who Christ is in every part of the world. It's a kind of like, I don't know, like a kind of kenotic gaze, trying to like, God, where are you? Working through the circumstances in my life, but and also in others. And so in that sense, when I started to feel the energy to write creatively again after the conversion, it's another one of these inarticulable signs, right? It's like, wow, okay, I'm feeling like I'm kind of becoming more and more the person who God is calling me to be and has already called me to be. So
I have a parallel, by the way, not in creative writing. I don't do much creative writing now. I always want to, but just run out of time.
Yeah, sure.
I have a parallel in just appreciating fiction.
Oh, interesting.
Because I hardly read any fiction before I was Catholic. And since becoming Catholic, I have read a lot more fiction.
That's super interesting.
And have deeply appreciated it.
Yeah.
And the moral universe that it portrays.
It's a kind of charity of vision.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how because that's how God sees everything.
Right.
Like lovingly holding it in being. Yeah. Right. So
same thing with film for me. I mean, I'm also a film buff, as you know, and I wasn't before I became Catholic.
Yeah.
Like I liked watching movies. And by that I mean, Star Wars, Transformers,
cars,
whatever, like exciting things that are just fun to watch. And since converting, I've appreciated good films. Like what I would distinguish films from movies in that way.
Right.
Not universally. Not in all contexts but when I'm in casual conversation, I talk about movies and talk about films. And since becoming Catholic, I like films.
Yeah.
So Yeah, similar in that way.
That's beautiful. So, yeah, I guess all to say, when I decided to come back for the DPhil in Oxford shortly after converting, and my rationale was that I had deferred the DPhil offer just to have as a backup if the VC stuff didn't work out. And so my very logical and scholarly approach was, okay, I've converted to the church now, so I'm just going to go read Aquinas, Augustine, Newman, and then I can face the world. And that was my DPhil strategy.
Again,
you know what I mean?
You could do worse.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. With some like McIntyre and Taylor thrown in.
Yeah, sure.
So I had a kind of strange gap of about 8 months, 6 to 8 months, somewhere in there before I started grad school. Okay. And I said,
this is after the MST, but before
after the
DPhil.
MST. So this would have been in the spring of 22 now. And I went to go start the DPhil in the fall of 22.
Did you start in history or in theology?
Oh, I did. I started in history. Yeah. To live is to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often. As our man Newman. Newman
That's
again.
Newman? Okay,
yeah. So anyway,
to live is to change. To
be perfect is to have changed often.
That's good.
Yeah. So I was thinking, well, I've always wanted to write films and stuff, so may as well do it now while I have a chance. Yeah. And so I had some friends in Austin where I was based at the time who were also Christians and also artists, and we were complaining about Christian art. Yeah, why is it so derivative and boring? And then we said, okay, well, we should do something about this. So I wrote this script for an animated short. It's a kind of fun pilot story about an astronaut, a little kid who swings up to the moon with the help of a baseball bat and a rusty swing.
I mean, you gotta.
I know, right? Yeah, of course, swing, baby. Yeah. And then I showed it to my friend, and he's like, "Oh, cute! Like, do you have $60K and 10 animators to work on this?" I said,
"Nope, sure don't."
Nope. And so then he said, "Write a script that you can actually make." And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just make it one actor, one scene. What's the most like dramatic situation I could think of? Oh, confession, obviously. Just a new Catholic too. So that's how Absolution, which was the first short film, was born. And went to New York, filmed it in an old abbey, actually.
And it's a one-man cast, right?
It's a one-man cast, yeah. So that was great fun. Yeah, it's about a man who sees his therapist for help with a difficult problem and leaves with mixed results. Yeah. So I think one of the things that was so helpful is to just start by doing, and the circles really aligned in a strange way. I had some great friends from undergrad help build the set, help as a dramaturge or a runner on set. And then it was one of these things where you can kind of feel, okay, God is really making this happen. Like things that shouldn't work out have worked out in a really cool way. And so it kind of bit me with the film bug just in time to go to grad school. And so then
and just dive into papers all day in the
that's
library.
Right. So I started out in history trying to understand Charles Taylor's critique of disenchantment.
Yep.
And I got increasingly disenchanted with disenchantment, as they say. I know it's another long story I won't get into, but I was history in Wadham, and then I ended up, my historian advisors were getting nervous because I was getting too normative.
Right.
And my thesis subject was still alive.
I mean, when I was
Heaven forbid,
when I was doing my thesis in international relations, my advisors were getting nervous because I was getting too historical.
Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all disciplinary. Yeah. So then they sent me to theology. And so I started working with a theologian on Charles Taylor. And then
so your DPhil will end up being in theology.
In theology, yeah. And so then after a summer of working on Taylor, I was like, you know what? I've been reading him against Newman the whole time. I'm not really happy with his misty stance on the sacraments, nor his kind of anti-metaphysical approach. So I'm just
because Taylor's, I mean, he's a card-carrying Catholic, but he's probably not an Orthodox Catholic.
He's not. No, and he's really formed, I think, by like generation 1968. So it's all political. Yeah. And his masters are like Hegel, Merleau-Ponty, Wittgenstein, and Heidegger. So it's a lot of phenomenology stuff. Yeah. And there's a lot of resonance between the way he reads source, like the history of ideas about selfhood, and some of the things that Newman's doing with development of doctrine. So there's a kind of like
parallel
elective affinity, right, between the ideas. But Taylor is not going to really get you back to mystic metaphysics. Yeah. Whereas Newman himself is this bridge between the fathers, a little bit of like the scholastics. He didn't read a ton, but some. And then the modern turn and people who are coming in the 20th century to try to understand, the way of knitting together the insights from phenomenology and existentialism and philosophy of language into the Catholic tradition.
Has Taylor read Newman?
Good question. I don't think very deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he had, but
it's always interesting to pose these. I mean, I don't want to get too far afield. I want to get back to your film stuff, but it's always interesting to me to think about the deficits in one's own education.
Yeah. Which one has to accept.
I have plenty of deficits of my own. And of course, like, we're humans of finitude. So all of us will have some measure of defect. But sometimes when people are they're getting so close, but not quite there, like Taylor and some of the ways you've described, you just wonder, man, I wonder if he had read the right people or the right person.
Totally.
Like, would he had been more correct? And the best example of this that I've encountered is John Calvin, who, as far as we know, never read Aquinas.
Oh,
Isn't that wild?
That is wild. Yeah.
So John Calvin, who's responsible for many, I know you have Reformed family members, I have Reformed family members.
Yeah, I do.
John Calvin's responsible for forming the hearts and minds of so many serious Protestant confessional Christians.
Yeah.
What if he had read Aquinas and not
you go crazy. Yeah, you could totally go crazy. Yeah. I suppose the question then is, can your framework make sense of that?
Right.
Can you see a providential and redemptive way in which that has been used? Understanding that your limited perspective on those things can exhaust the reality, but you can, at the same time, Newman has a place for Arius, in the development of doctrine, and talks a lot about how it's precisely in this tension-ridden interaction between the world and the church that's exactly right. And so it's always church in dialogue with the world, purifying what she finds there, and seeing where the objections, the reactions, the anger, the revolutions point out what's missing as a kind of gap or aporia that then needs to be filled. So I think Taylor's actually really good on trying to think more about what is a Catholic modernity and how does this kind of pluralistic state in which we find ourselves pave the way to a new Catholic authenticity. Yeah. He may take it a bit too far, but I do think that basic impulse is right. And I think one of the notes or signs that it is a good way to go is that it's charitable. Yeah. It looks and tries to really see, what am I missing here? Even if you have the answer wrong, you probably have a pretty strong diagnostic. Yeah. So, yeah.
So back to
film stuff. Yeah,
so you're in grad school. You're starting to do creative writing. You've done the astronaut thing. You've done the Absolution. You've actually produced that film.
Yeah, that's right. So,
and I remember being in like email conversation with you around this time, and then you decided to start work on another animated project.
Yeah, that's right. So I switched to Newman basically very shortly after I switched from Wadham College to Oriel College, which I credit to his intercession and to the intercession of another great friend from Texas who is at Oriel. So things are starting to kind of, fall into place. Then I, through separate channels, I had written this script about a much shorter animated short that was initially inspired by Love and Responsibility by John Paul II. And it's a love story between a cloud and flower. And had sent this script to a friend of mine who I met at the Austin Cathedral after Mass one day when I was just like back in town in Texas visiting my family for Christmas, as one does, and this was the church where I was received back in December 21. And my friend, Christian McGuigan, read it and he's like, oh yeah, we got to make this, because he's starting a new studio, Sycamore Studios, with his friend Tim Reckert. And Tim is an Oscar-nominated animation director and writer. And
Tim's in California, though, right?
That's right. He's in LA for now. Yeah. We're hoping he ends up down south at some point. Cool. But yeah, so anyway, then Christian put me in touch with Tim, and then we've been working on Parasol, which is this animated short, for about 1.5 years now. Wow. And so it's been an amazing learning experience the whole way through. Tim is a great mentor, and it's challenging in many ways because the script had to go through several rewrites, and we've been working with a very talented story artist in LA, another really amazing editor, also LA based, and we'll be shortly working with another musician who'll be doing our score, who's Tim has worked with previously on his Oscar nominated short. So yeah, it's fun. It's one of these shorts that you would imagine seeing playing before a feature length Pixar film. Yeah. It's like the man playing chess Against Himself being one that I read. It's so good. Yeah.
It's Jerry's Game, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Jerry's Game. So, yeah, and I think that it's been a great opportunity to learn about, okay, how do you tell a story with no dialogue?
Yeah. How
do you make sure that you're giving the audience just kind of one new point of information at every turn in the story, and leaving nothing open to confusion or kind of misinterpretation? How are the ambiguities deliberate, and not simply mistakes? Yeah, it makes one think about the divine economy in many ways. You're right.
For sure.
So that's been a great project. And then on separate channels from that, I am good friends with Sean Scaveline, who's another Austin-based filmmaker, a documentarian. And
I met Sean.
He's great. Guy, he's so awesome. He directed the Humanum documentary series for the Vatican a little while back, and then just recently made an amazing short doc about Troy Kutzer, who's the Oscar winner.
That's the one that we saw.
That's right. To My Father. Yeah, which you can find online.
We I think he showed part of it.
That's right.
At the
De Nicola conference.
We were together at the De Nicola Center.
That's it. Yeah.
That Notre Dame hosts every fall. And
the Catholic imagination.
You shared a round table with Tim Reckert.
That's right.
Sean and
Elizabeth Mirzai, who's another Oscar-nominated documentary.
Yeah. And she showed one of her trailers.
That's right.
And Sean showed the trailer for To My Father.
That's right. Yeah.
And then Tim showed a part of his.
Head Over Heels.
Head Over Heels. Short. That was great. They were all great.
Claymation. Yeah. They're so great. Yeah. So anyway, Sean sent me an email. It would have been about a year ago, with the subject line like "story about samurai saint?" ?
And you were like, yes.
Yeah, that's basically what it was. I was like, yes, before I even opened the email. So
let's go.
Yeah, he and I have been developing this film project, kind of with the vision toward it being a multimedia project about a 17th century samurai saint. He's technically a blessed. His name is Blessed Yusto Takayama Ukan, beatified in 2017. So all we need is a miracle, you know. Our God, not really a hard ask.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so we've been working on that story, and are looking to shoot a documentary this spring on it.
I want to not ask you too many details about that, because I want to have you back on after the documentary is shot. You can give us all the stories, because I know you want to go on location in Japan and all that. So we'll save that, but just give me like a 30-second overview of who Blessed Yusto was.
Yes, absolutely. I'll do that, and then I'll tie it to some of the Newmanian reflections. Sure. Yeah, so long story short is that Ukan,
who is
converts to the church. Takayama Ukan. I'll just refer to him as Ukan. That's kind of how Japanese. Is
Justin.
So Justo is Eustace, which is the Latin baptismal name taken from Justin Martyr.
Okay.
So his
it's a derivative
dates,
of Justin.
That's
but
right.
He's not actually Justo until he becomes a Christian.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So his dates are 1552 to 1615, more or less. And really, the 16th century is the end of the Sengoku period in Japan, which is the period of warring states. So it's feudal kingdoms.
Warlords,
exactly. Warlords leading these fighting kingdoms. No one really has centralized control. Three great unifiers, as they're called, come along and start to do the work of centralizing the state.
Is Nobunaga one of the
That's
three?
right. He's the first. Yeah, because you've been reading some historical fiction.
Like I said to you the other day, I don't normally know all these.
Right. You just come swinging with all these
fresh
great
in my
names.
memory.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And Nobunaga,
Shogun is also set during this period. Okay. So, and then, so the matchlock gun gets introduced to Japanese shores in like 1543 because of some Portuguese traders who kind of are blown off course and end up in Japan. And then 6 years later, St. Francis Xavier arrives to bring the gospel. So it's, the tender is set, so to speak, and then the flames.
Literally.
Yeah, that's right.
The matchlock gun.
So it's an incredibly tumultuous period, and then this is the century in which Justo comes of age, right?
Wow.
So then the question I think we're asking with the film is, all right, Lord, who were you in 16th century Japan? Show us how to be a saint in a time when the only holy people seem to be martyrs. Yeah. How do you live a holy life in this corrupt age? And so Husto's father, Dario, converts to the church based on his relationships with some Japanese Jesuits. And then Ukon himself is baptized at around 11 or 12. So here he is. His vocation is to be a warrior. He's the heir to the Takayama clan. So how does one live the life of a sword when you're called to carry the cross?
Man.
And the through line has been, well, the sword precisely was his cross. He works his way up through the ranks and ends up fighting under each of the three unifiers. And the whole time is using the wealth and the lands that he wins through conquests to help the Jesuits build up the mission in Japan.
That's crazy.
Yeah, building seminaries and supporting fathers and all the rest. And so really towards the end of the 1580s, the country starts to be unified by the great Taiko, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. And at this point, Husto is his kind of right-hand man. And Hideyoshi starts to suspect the Christian missionaries as being the first of a political invasion from the Spanish and Portuguese, and so begins to outlaw Christianity.
He's wrong about the source, but he's right about the invasion.
Right.
This is Christendom.
Totally. And what's fascinating and has come up again and again is that the battle lines in the Sengoku era are not drawn between the Christians and the Buddhists. They're drawn between the Christians and those who believe in a transcendent power and the secular political mind.
Yeah.
And this is what makes them dangerous, is because they don't play by any rules that someone like Hideyoshi can control. And so the threat is always interpreted as political, right? And in many ways, there's just a kind of blindness to any supernatural realities or any realities working in and beyond what's seen.
Yep.
And that's what's so amazing about Ukon's witness, is that he kept the supernatural vision the whole way through. He was given this dichotomy by his boss, right? To either recant his faith or give up all his status.
Yeah.
And he chooses to give up everything and goes into exile. And then the persecutions start in earnest about 10 years later. And this is when you get the 26 martyrs of Nagasaki in 1597. And
but he's not one of them.
He's not one of them. No, he was seen as too valuable a warlord, right? And so goes as a essentially under house arrest in the northern part of the main island.
Noble.
That's right. Yeah, living in exile.
17th century.
Yeah, that's right. And so here he is, having spent his whole life a master of castle warfare, suddenly turns to building castles. Wow. He's like an architect. He's a master of the tea ceremony. He continues to use this as the means of evangelizing. Oh yeah, so the tea ceremony in Japan, especially around this time, is a ritual activity that was seen as a place of having serious conversations, as a kind of encounter between persons, but also a fundamentally kind of peaceful activity.
So a prototype of a podcast.
Basically. Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, here it is. Yeah. But it's heavily ritualized.
Yeah.
And so there are many parallels actually with the Catholic Mass, because there's a very strict way of doing things right, and a kind of a great respect for the elements. It's traditional. It's a kind of communion.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so it also talk about polarities being held in creative tension. Someone like Husto, who is a master of samurai warfare and also a master of the tea ceremony, and using one as a means to evangelize other high-ranking daimyo the whole way through. So eventually, the third great unifier, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who emerges from the climactic battle of Sekigahara.
Well,
you go. Yeah. He's really the first shogun who comes out of the Sengoku period and starts to in earnest clamp down control.
It was interesting to me
country.
That his name actually bears some phonetic resemblance to Jesus.
Oh, interesting. Tokugawa Ieyasu. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I would have to look into that. I don't don't know of any connection, but I don't know. These strange rhythms of Providence, they exactly, really do echo.
That's where I was going with that.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a way of doing history where it's not a cultural poetics in the new historicist sense, but it is a kind of theological poetics, right?
I like that idea.
Yeah, and you're not boxing Providence in. You're just in a kind of a posteriori sense trying to understand God. How are you working through these very ironic, poignant rhymes?
Yeah.
And so Ukon's exiled by Ieyasu because he's a threat. And so he's marched with his people through the mountains from Kanazawa to Nagasaki, put on a ship, and sent to the Philippines.
Okay.
And so after that, Japan seals itself off from the world. And then, 15, 30 years later, silence. So this is the period of the hidden Christians.
200 years,
that's right. Yeah, until Commodore Perry comes along in the late 19th century. There he is. Yeah.
So what happened to Blessed Justo in
so he arrives at the Philippines. Their ship hit massive storms on the way. Okay. The mast breaks, and they're reported to have carried a statue of Our Lady off the deck with him. Yeah. Wow. So there's still massive devotion to Blessed Justo in the Philippines. And the Spanish want him to lead an invasion back into Japan.
Well, I mean, this is how he's cut his teeth.
That's right. And he refuses.
Okay.
And then
will not take up the sword.
That's right. Yeah. And then he dies shortly after, about
not
2
martyred,
months
but
later.
Just
dies of illness. Yeah. But beatified as a martyr in 2017. And a lot of the cause for that is this idea of his living a living martyrdom. Because when he was in exile, really from the first persecutions in the late 1580s, all the way through the final exile in the 16 teens, he was basically under constant threat, like under a constant kind
of sort of martyrdom by exile.
That's right.
Just like St. John. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and it was always being ready to be called to give one's faith, because especially with the kind of volatility of the era and even the volatility of the unifiers, it was never quite clear what the policy would be and to what degree it would be enforced. He's often compared to a kind of Japanese St. Thomas More, which is interesting.
My confirmation saint.
Yeah, right on. Amazing. Yeah. So you can kind of see the parallels there. I think he's a layman. He's a father. He's a husband. He's a grandfather. He married a woman named Justa. Can you believe it? She's also a Catholic convert.
Like the theological
I know. Yeah, like shares the same baptismal name.
No kidding.
So
that's cool.
And so I think there's a lot to be thought about there too, in terms of work and vocation to do one's job really, really well. Yeah. And ultimately, simultaneously doing it extremely well, and then remaining detached enough from it, such that one could be in the position to have the kind of heroic witness that he had.
That's beautiful.
So it's a very rich story. And,
so you and Sean are making a documentary on this.
That's right. Yes.
And you'll come back on to talk about that.
Yeah. God willing.
Great. Very cool.
So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that.
Yeah,
I know we
my
have
gosh,
to go now,
my pleasure.
This was great. It went longer than I intended, even. So thanks for your.
How are we doing?
We were doing okay, but
good.
Thanks for your time to share
thank
that
you
with
for
us.
having me on. Yeah,
and I'll look forward to hearing more about it. Next time we chat.
Great.
Cool.
All right.
All right. We'll end there. Thanks so much, Lauren.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah.
Yeah.